antithetical to the liberties that are at the core of the Western vision of the good society. I'd love to hear comments from our expert guests on what the best line of response to that.
Yeah.
For me, it's a problem. I'll pose it as a problem. What is the best way to tackle that?
Actually, that's a very insightful question. Let's start. There are three things I would say in response to it. The first is to put Rose Wilder Lane in her own context. She was a libertarian, and not just any libertarian. She's considered one of the three godmothers of the libertarian movement, the other two being Isabel Patterson, author of The God and the Machine, and Ayn Rand. But, so her notion of freedom is what we call liberty, meaning freedom from arbitrary restraints. Now you ask, so how does that square with Islam, which as a way of life may, and it says does include the non-aggression principle, but it's not just the non-aggression principle. You don't say, I don't believe in coercing people, so that makes me a Muslim. There's other things you believe in order to be a Muslim, including what is the good life. And you want to live the good life as God commands you to do. Now, how do you reconcile that with this notion of freedom? Well, I say the Quran addresses that directly in the description of the creation of mankind. It's a story that'll be familiar to Jewish and Christians as well, although there's little differences that are very important, I think, very significant. The creation of Adam and Eve. The Quran says when God decides to create Adam, he announces to the angels, I'm going to create a vicegerent on earth. A vicegerent meaning like a trustee, someone who is going to be in charge of the world on God's behalf. And the angels ask, are you going to put the earth in the charge of someone who will shed blood and do mischief? Because God is creating someone with free will.
Yes.
Someone who can choose whether to obey God or to disobey God, which the angels have no choice about. The angels can only do what's good. Their nature makes it impossible for them to disobey God. And God's response to this question is, I know what you do not know. He creates Adam, he breathes of his spirit into Adam, and he says to the angels, tell me the nature of things. And the angels say, we only know what you tell us. We can't tell you the nature of things. He turns to Adam and he says, tell them the nature of things. And Adam proceeds to do so. What the Quran is saying is there's a connection between volition and rationality, creativeness. That it is because man is free that he's able to think critically, think for himself. He couldn't do it if he weren't free. And therefore it was indispensable that God give him that freedom, that even as God gives him guidance, this is what you should do. For your own good, this is what you should do. But I'm not going to force you to do it. Now you will bear the consequences. But for the time being, do it, not do it, you know. But I'm giving you all the information you need to know why you should do it. Then he orders the angels to bow down to Adam. Now think about this. That's symbolic of saying Adam is above the angels, right? This contradicts people's intuitions. Mark Twain once said that God created the man somewhere between the angels and the French. A hierarchy which has the angels on the top. But here God is saying, no. Man is superior. How can man be superior? Because a being who chooses to do what God wants is superior to a being that can't help but do what God wants. The angels, morally speaking, the angels are not superior to a rock that rolls down a hill or a planet that swims in its orbit, because those things can only do that. They don't have a choice. The angels have no choice. Man has a choice. And that makes man superior. Now, among the angels is this character, a jinn, and I guess we're going to have to get into jinns. Right? The important thing is to know jinns have free will, okay? This jinn is among the angels, even though he has free will. Why? Because he has a very high opinion of himself. He says, I have free will, but I'm so good, I might as well be an angel. When God says to the angels, bow down to Adam, the angels do, but jinn doesn't. And God says, so why didn't you bow down to those, you're amongst? And he says, because I'm better than he is. You created him out of clay and you created me out of fire. Now, that's totally missing the point, right? He's turning away from this notion of voluntary submission to God's will into what you're created of, which is like as bigoted as saying you're superior because of the color of your skin. You're superior because you're made of fire? Excuse me? So God condemns him for this action. But Satan says, and from that point on in the Quran he's referred to as Satan.
Mm-hmm.
Satan says, give me respite until the day you judge them, mankind. And God, being the all-merciful, he says, you have it. Now, instead of being grateful and saying, well, I'm sorry for what I did, I recognize you're the most merciful. And no, he says, great, I'm going to use that time to lay every trap for this character until you see, he doesn't deserve to be the vicegerent on earth. God's response is, do what you will, but you have no power over my servants. But if they follow you, you and those who follow you will be consigned to the hellfire. Then God puts Adam and Eve in the garden, and he gives them only one rule. There's this tree, stay away from this tree. This is seen as a preface to our life on earth, right? In other words, our life is more complicated. There are lots of rules, lots of things to worry about, lots of traps. They have just one. Do whatever you want, just stay away from this one tree. Now, of course, you know this story from the Bible, except in the Bible it's called the tree of knowledge, or the tree of life, or the tree of knowledge of good and evil. In the Quran, it's the tree of harm and transgression. God says, stay away from this tree or you'll run into harm and transgression. What happens? Satan says, God just doesn't want you to go to this tree because you'll live forever. Well, of course, they're already immortal. They have immortal souls. So this is a lie, but they fall for it. Now, what happens is that they realize their mistake and they ask for God's forgiveness. That's another difference from the biblical version. God forgives them. Now, this leads to the biggest difference between Islam and Christianity. There's a lot of nonsense about how they differ. They're almost the same, but there's one really big difference. Because there's no original sin in Islam, there's no need for a vicarious atonement. We are all going to be judged on our own merits. We are living what they lived. We have to choose whether we're going to voluntarily submit to God or not. But now, tying the libertarian theme with the good life theme, the only way that we can be tested is if we are free. And even if other human beings were competent, which of course they're not, that would make them gods and goddesses, and they're not. Even if other humans were competent to make us live the good life, if they would have succeeded in doing so, they would have deprived us of this test, which is why we're here. God wants to know, will we do what he has commanded us to do? Not because he needs to know, of course, he knows everything. Because we need to know. So on the day of judgment, we don't say, oh, this was so unfair. He said, I gave you the freedom. You were free. You know you were free. You know you made these choices. And I told Satan he has no power over you. All he could do is he made suggestions. It's true. But you chose to follow the suggestions. He did not, to paraphrase Flip Wilson, maybe you remember Flip Wilson? He didn't put a gun to your head. So that's how I tie those things together. I don't know if you want to.
I guess so. In looking at this, the whole idea of freedom away from oppressors, right? Authorities, is that it is consistent in the same way that you would give the ayah in Quran that says that la ikraha fi din, that there is no compulsion. And once again, in his explanation, I thought it was excellent, right? In saying that don't just say deen is in religion, it's in how you move in life, right? You have an expectation that nobody's going to challenge how you move in life, right? That you have a freedom to move in life as you please. And that freedom to do that, right, allows you to process your thinking to be liberated. Without the freedom, even if, let's say that my thinking is bad, okay? This is what I'm telling you. I'm saying, how many of us here believe we know everything? Anybody? Is there anybody here that knows everything.
I do.
So, sometimes you do. But the fact that he said sometimes, right? That means sometimes he doesn't know, right? So, you're not going to find anyone unless their thinking is so distorted, I'll put it in that fashion, that believes that they know everything. All of us are limited in our understanding and our knowledge. So that means that, this is why I say liberation is a process of seeking freedom. If slavery is to have wrong thought, false thinking, that means every single one of us here now, I'm sorry, myself included, there's something here that you think about that, guess what? You're wrong. That's where we are. Well, see, in authority, if you say you have an authority, it's consistent in saying, yeah, nobody should tell you and force you because, heck, they don't know either. As much as we believe in government, government is not infallible. So our government should be checked. In that same ayat in Quran that I read, is that if the government is doing something wrong, if my mother is doing something wrong, if whoever is doing something wrong, if I'm doing something wrong. No, it is the responsibility of good citizens to call every wrong act a wrong act so we can all be at peace and gain truth. Even for the person who doesn't have truth and they're in the act of falsehood. When they get to truth, they will thank you. Now, when you're in falsehood, of course I'm not going to thank you. I'm committing a crime. Why are you messing with me? Does the criminal want you to stop them from robbing the bank? Of course not. But if they ever get to a reality of truth, of earning a living without oppressing other people and taking their wealth, then they'll understand, me especially. I recently started employing people. Never have I been more conscious on my own job of working and making sure the hours that I'm there, that I'm working, until I got people who work for me and they weren't working. Now I'm like, you're stealing from me. I'm paying you to work 8 hours and you're working 4. But I didn't see that reality all the time. When I was the one at work saying, I guess I'll just go to lunch. So, in that respect, it's the same. But once again, I think in the other respect is that life Al-Islam is taking it a step farther in saying that the human being has to be self-reproaching. So it's not all about what the government does, but what do you do for the government? And I think, once again, that's still consistent. You see what I'm saying? I'm saying it's not all about what, don't let the hierarchy be above you. Well, you created the hierarchy. You create the systems. And if you as an individual are not responsible to your own self, because it said you're supposed to call your own self to account, then if you don't have the capacity to liberate your own thinking, then the system itself will run amok. And I hope that's clear. I don't know if it is.
There was a third point I'm sorry, I omitted. Please allow me to get it in. And because you mentioned, is there a connection here with John Locke? And there is, actually. Yeah. And there's when you read Locke, his wording is sounds so Islamic about the rights God has given us and so on and so forth. And you might think it's a coincidence, but it actually is not. There is a smoking gun connection between Locke and Islam. John Locke started out his career as a pragmatist. In his diary, he said, I changed my mind about these issues and adopted the human rights position after attending a party given by a professor in London. Now, it turns out the professor in London he's talking about is Edward Pocock, who had just translated in 1671, had translated Hayy ibn Yaqzum into Latin. Hayy ibn Yaqzum was the Awake, the Son of Alive, is a book written by Ibn Tufayl. Ibn Tufayl was an Islamic philosopher who wrote a story about a perfect reasoning being who is spontaneously generated on a desert island, and who, because he has perfect reasoning being, he deduces all the laws of nature, he deduces God must exist and has created all this, but he can't figure out whether to worship God or not. He wants to worship God because God is so perfect, but on the other hand, it seems like, what's the point? God doesn't need my worship. What's the point of this? And then some ordinary human beings land on the island. The boat crashes, and he helps them fix their boat, and he's fascinated by these beings because even though their reasoning is not perfect, it's inferior to his, yet they came up with things he never thought of, like they cook their food. And he says, this makes it taste good as well as make it last longer. Maybe I can learn from these people. So he goes with them, he helps them fix their boat, he goes back to the main island. He's put in a literal ivory tower where he can look down on society without interacting with it. And he observes how people behave. And now he suddenly understands why it's necessary to worship God. There's a good way of living that just as there are laws of nature, he finds there are laws of society, laws of economics, sociology, psychology. And the really smart human beings can sort of discover these laws. Yeah. But if they have guidance from God, their imperfect reasoning can prevent making mistakes. But even more important, the vast majority of people who are incapable of discovering these laws are benefited by having a prophet, someone who they recognize his character and they respect him, come and say, yes, this is what's right and this is what's wrong, and if you'll do what's right, everybody's going to be better off and you're going to go to paradise and so on and so forth. And he says, it is necessary for human beings to worship God, not just because God deserves it, but because it's actually going to have a practical effect on their society and their lives. That book, translated as the Philosophus Autodidactus, was when Locke learned about its contents from this professor, he totally changed his point of view and he said, I believe in natural rights, and he began to echo these fundamental rights of human beings the Muslims have been talking about. They called them the maqasid al-Sharia, the purpose of the law. They said, the Sharia is a law, but what's the purpose of it? Why is it here? It says higher objectives. And they listed 5 of them. The right to life, the right to property, the right to your intellect, the right to your religion, and the right to kinship, to lineage. Now, the right to life and the right to property are 2 of Locke's rights, and the others are examples of what he calls the right to liberty, or as Jefferson would put it, the pursuit of happiness.
Exactly.
The part of the question that I remember
I know, right?
is about the picture that we get in the West, like through the media, of Western democracy and freedom compared to Islam. How many people here are Americans? Raise your hand.
How many people are what?
Americans. Okay. Now, raise your hand if you own a broadcasting company. Raise your hand if you own a newspaper syndicate. You're American, but you're not an eagle. The eagles own the media. There is no such thing as a free press. There is no broadcasting a company that can do what it wants because it's owned by somebody. Don't you ever read in the news that this newspaper was sold from this syndicate to the other syndicate? The so-called free press is property. You have a right to own a broadcasting company. But you don't have no chance. Okay? So you are free to vote your ideas, but the ideas that you get to choose from come through somebody's property. The few choose the music for the many. The few choose the news. If you own a paper, you get to decide if it's a liberal paper or a conservative paper. If you own the broadcasting company, you decide, and it's going to run what you decide. There is no newspaper running around doing what it wants to do. There is no syndicate of broadcasting running around free, doing what it wants to do. Now, originally, as we said from the first chapter of the Bible, the human beings all were created to be masters. If you check the Declaration of Independence, the signatories, I have not done a historical study on the life of everybody that signed, but there were no losers signing that declaration. Everybody was a master of something. They were a master of their lands, a master of their trade, a master of their craft. In the biblical example of the children of Israel coming out from under Pharaoh, you're either a slave under Pharaoh, or you're a master in the promised land, or you're in the wilderness in between, free. You can't get freer than the wilderness. Wildernesses and jungles are pure freedom. And if you're not the eagle, you're the eagle food.
There you go. A long way, Bob.
Freedom is where the predators want everybody to be free. Eagles don't want rabbits in cages. Eagles want rabbits running around free. Am I right? So there's a quote somewhere around here or in the materials from Imam W. Muhammad saying correct education is essential for human progress. So if you don't know what the deal is and you're deceived, you just rabbit food. Eagle food, thank you.
For the mic to someone to ask a question.
Yes, let's do that.
I would bring you the mic for your question.
Over here.
Yes, this directed to anyone on the panel. It just occurred to me, you're speaking about Islam and freedom, and we look in the world, and freedom is not the first thing that comes to most people's minds when they think of Islam and Muslims in the world. So how would you address the difference between the concept of freedom that you're seeing expressed in the Quran and the life of the Prophet compared to what we see in the life of Muslims, where that kind of freedom to speak up and affect your government and determine how you're gonna live just doesn't seem to be in practice.
I'm going to jump on that one because I actually think your question is very similar to what he just asked us. Is because I think something that he said is that how Al-Islam is seen now, you feel like it's more restriction, right? Is what they would say. There's restriction. There's restriction on my dress, right? Clearly, this can't be free. And I think that's where the definition of what freedom and what liberation is. And that's why I kind of spent a lot of time on understanding liberation and thought. Because even if you were a free rabbit and the eagle was flying above, even though you don't have the dollars to own a broadcasting station, you can still be liberated in your own thinking on whether or not you were going to listen to the news that was brought to you, right? So a liberated mind is able to critically listen to any piece of news, right? No matter who it's being delivered from, and they're going to be able to go through it and say, well, yeah, this is madness, you know, and this is not. So in respect of how Al-Islam is seen is that the very first thing I want to tell you, all of you, and most of you all may not have read the book. Read this book, or even just read this one, right? Islam and the Discovery of Freedom. In the portion, when you're talking about what was before, and you look at the ideas of freedom according to Rose Wilder Lane, is that The systems that are set up right now in Saudi Arabia are not consistent with the systems of justice that Muhammad the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did at the time of Muhammad the Prophet. They're not. They have kings in Saudi Arabia. The very thing that the society was saying is inconsistent. So what is seen and what is permeated in the society as al-Islam according to Quran is not always al-Islam according to Quran. Women being brutalized, that is not al-Islam according to Quran. Right? People not having freedoms in their own countries. That's not consistent. So I think a part of the discourse is for me, it's for him, it's for those who here to give a proper reality that democracy in America is very close to what al-Islam would say is allowed. Now, I'm not saying complete, okay? That's not what I'm telling you. But I'm saying of how Muhammad the Prophet, how he would say that people had freedoms, how people they were allowed to do and practice, that here in America, you can do it here in America better than you can in Saudi. So it's not that it's inconsistent, it's just what is presented as Islamic. And what is consistent with al-Islam is incorrect. That's my thoughts.
I think the sister put, hammer on the nail. There's a distinction between liberty and license. If I were to ask you, and maybe we should do a little gameplay here, are you dressed the way you're dressed because some human being forced you to do that, or because you believe firmly and sincerely this is what Allah wants you to do? Well, I think I know what the answer to that question is. That's freedom. Or another way of looking at it. I once was attending an adult lecture at the Islamic school where I was teaching, and we were listening. It was during the Eid Kabir holiday, the Eid Adha holiday, and there was a sister giving a lecture about Abraham. Now, the lecture was nothing remarkable. It was what you'd expect about the importance of sacrifice and how Abraham loved God so much he would sacrifice his son, and God loved man so much that he would not accept a human sacrifice and said you have to sacrifice the lamb. Totally what you'd expect. A man sitting next to me, who was himself from Egypt originally, whispered in my ear, "There's not a single Muslim country in which she could give this speech."
Exactly.
And I thought, what?
Yes.
I said, what are you talking about?
Yes.
He said, in half of them, she would be called a Muslim fundamentalist, and in the other half, they'd say, what's a woman doing giving a speech?
Yes. That's it.
So, what the sister said, you are more free to be a Muslim in this country than in any Muslim country on earth. Because you make the final decision of what it is God wants you to do. Now, obviously, we consult scholars and we listen to them, and but the final decision in this country is ours. And therefore, you are or are not a good Muslim according to your choices, not according to somebody else's choices.
Yes.
We would like to kind of close this out. What time is it? I mean, it's
5 after 8.
Okay, and actually it's supposed to close at 8 o'clock. So we'll let him ask this last question, but we probably only have one person that can respond, perhaps.
I just want to ask the Imam a question. In the American Muslim Society, when Imam Muhammad passed away, may God forgive me, sins over your paradise. And I want to ask one question. Why, when he passed on, why was nobody maybe became a leader of this community, could lead the American Muslim Society, since he had passed away? Because when I be looking at YouTube and all this interpretation, and it's just so many interpretations that are just ridiculous. I want to ask you that question.
I don't have an authoritative official answer, but after the dismissal, we can discuss ideas.
Yeah. And I tell you what, I'll simply say this. Muhammad, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he never told that anybody should be the leader after him. The people chose Abu Bakr. But according to Muhammad's dictate of how leadership arises, it arises from the people.
Well, all I can say is how awesome was this?
Yes.
So I'm going to close out by saying, number one, Dr. Ahmad's books are outside, and he also has availability if you want to order them. We will be selling them in this store. We already sell them. We'll have them for sale here. The evaluation form, please. I don't have one. Hold up in the evaluation form. We have to have the evaluation form filled out. It's just a page and then a little bit on the back. But in order for us to keep giving good programs like this, we have to show that people are.
Please complete them. It's like college classes.
Thank you, thank you. Just want to give credit to our great funders for this program and others, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation and the Mississippi Humanities Council. Thank you all very much. Please feel free to engage our scholars. Thank you very much.